Hey, how's it? So, the last video we discussed all the different methods to plant out a garden bed, all the different ways that you can go about it. This video we're going to discuss all the considerations. Most of the considerations are pretty much applicable to all of the methods, so I thought I'd separate the two. So the video was running a little bit long, so I'm trying to cut down on the time of these videos a little bit. So yeah, without further ado, let's get straight into the video. Okay, let's go through a few considerations, right? So where you plant things I suppose not really depending, but with all the techniques that we've just discussed, it's applicable to all of them, right? What you want to try and do, right? I've discussed in like a whole sun video of planting on the south side or the north side of the bed. You really want to take that into consideration now. Like especially with like where you're doing like very high intensity cropping methods like square foot gardening. If you're in the southern hemisphere, you want to plant your tall stuff on the south side, right? Because everything on the north side is going to get the most amount of sun. So if you plant your tall stuff on the north side, it's going to then shade everything out on the south side. So in the southern hemisphere, plant your tall stuff on the south side of your garden beds. And obviously inverted for the northern hemisphere. So if you're in the northern hemisphere, you want to plant your tall stuff on the northern side. And another way that you can approach it is you have sort of staggered plantings, right? Now, I'm not talking about in terms of time, but in terms of size. So you'll have something tall, short, tall, short, tall. Typically what you'll try and do then is the short stuff will have less tolerance to sun and heat. So the tall stuff will then shade them out a little bit, give them a little bit of a breather from the sun, and that's where this becomes very applicable. So let's say you have, I don't know, a row of tomatoes, a row of lettuces, row of tomatoes, row of lettuces, or something like that. Because then the tomatoes are going to shade out the lettuces and give them a bit of a break from the hot afternoon sun. So that's another way that you can do it. So instead of having everything sort of at the same level, you'll plant tall, short, tall, short, tall, short. Okay, and another thing that you can do is you plant your tallest stuff in the middle. What you would also try and do is those will be the varieties that have the longest times to maturity, because then what happens is then the stuff on the sort of getting away from the middle will have the shorter times to maturity. They will be shorter, so it'll be easier to get to everything, because then as the things come available on the sides, then you can get to the middle. Or because they are shorter and everything else is growing in the middle that's quite tall, you'll then be able to reach over quite easily without having to worry about a whole bunch of stuff. So those are sort of like 3 ways that you can go about it. Plant your taller stuff on the south side if you're in the southern hemisphere, or tall, short, or plant your taller stuff in the middle with everything sort of coming down at a sort of an angle. Okay, because this leads me on to essentially the next consideration. So I've mentioned now with monocropping and intercropping of the plants' differing requirements. What you really want to try and do, no matter what technique you do, no matter what you do, you sort of want to either have the same requirements in an area to ensure that everything gets, because it's a little bit difficult, right, to treat everything different. So what you want to try and do is have everything the same in that area. It just becomes so much easier, because imagine having to water something for like with 2 liters of water every 2 days here, right? And then right next to it you have something that doesn't like water, something that's a Mediterranean crop and only needs to be watered like once a week. You're going to drown something out, or you're going to starve something. So you really want to try and couple things with the similar requirements in the same area. Or there's a lot of plans and options available, right? The other thing that you can try and do is utilize the characteristics of certain plants to aid other plants. So one big thing is companion planting. You know, that's a video that I'm going to do at some point in the future. But essentially all that companion planting is let's take, for example, my cauliflowers and my broccolis. I have marigolds that's intercropped in that area. What happens is those marigolds become sacrificial plants for pests. So those characteristics of the preferred food for moths and caterpillars and stuff are then divert the pests away from what I want, or I divert them from the food that I want to eat to stuff that I don't want to eat. I don't want to eat a marigold. I don't know what they taste like. Can you eat marigolds? I don't even know. But that's what I'm trying to say, right? And the other thing is, I mean, everybody knows about tomatoes and basil. That's another way they can do it. That's also companion planting. Basil has been long considered a way to improve the flavor of tomatoes, and it also helps to keep aphids and stuff away from tomatoes. So that's also companion planting. So that's, again, utilizing characteristics of certain plants to aid other plants. Now those characteristics, like what I mentioned with tall, short, right? And even the whole intercropping thing. If, let's say, you have something that grows quite tall and bushy, and you want to maybe, I don't know, plant some lettuces, then you can use those tall bushy plants to afford some shade to the tender lettuces. So again, utilizing the characteristics of certain plants to aid other plants. It can even be like perennials, bro. I mean, I've got this arborvitae here, right? That's affording shade to some of my peas in the, well, unfortunately now it's the morning, right? But like when I had some other stuff here early in the season, it really helped. And you can do that everywhere else. I've got the peach tree that in the hot summer then shades this area out in like the hot afternoon, right? And it just really helps. So it's not just your annual veggies and fruits. It can also be your perennial. Okay, and now with that said, one thing you want to watch out for is allopathy. Okay, so an allopathic plant. So I don't know about all of the allopathic plants. I'm aware that cucumbers are allopathic. I can't remember the other ones at the moment. But you want to watch out for allopathy and heavy feeders. So an allopathic plant, what it does is it inhibits the growth of other plants in its immediate vicinity. It sends out, I'm not sure if it's hormones or chemicals that it leaches into the soil via its roots. One of the two. But essentially all it does is it attempts to inhibit the growth of surrounding plants to enable it to take root the fastest, to enable it to grow more, and enable it to take up all the nutrients that it requires. So you want to watch out that you don't plant like allopathic plants with stuff that is typically very hard to germinate. Typically some plants that are maybe a little bit weaker and a bit more tender. So like let's say you have been struggling with a particular variety of crop. Don't plant it next to or in the close vicinity of an allopathic plant, because you're not going to be sure of what the reason is that you're failing. It could be the allopathic plant, it could be something else. So it's something that you really want to watch out for. And the same sort of applies with heavy feeders. Corn, squash, tomato. You don't want to plant a lot of heavy feeders in the same sort of area, because then they're going to compete for nutrients and then everything is going to suffer as a result. You would typically want to plant heavy feeders with stuff that does not require as much nutrition, or heavy feeders that have very deep roots with maybe shallow rooting other stuff, whatever variety it is. That'll also help just combat that sort of competing nature of the plants, because at the end of the day, nature does what it does. The strong survive. So you don't want to, you want to give everything a good chance, right? You want to be successful at this. So don't plant a lot of heavy feeders in the area, everything is going to suffer. I think that's what I'm trying to say. So now there's two more considerations that I want to quickly discuss. The one, I've mentioned green walls, right? But the same applies to no matter which technique you apply, whether it's square foot gardening, monocropping, intercropping, doesn't matter. But you want to try and make use of vertical supports. You don't want to give a whole bunch of space to something that sprawls, that could climb, that is now going to sprawl on the ground. And by using vertical supports, like I mentioned, the tall, short, by using vertical supports, you can allow something to grow up to give shade to something else. The other thing is, like, I mean, like if you use like an arch, right? You can plant essentially like a small bed up right? And then you have like an arch that goes over this bed, and then you can plant something to, obviously grow over this arch, and then you still have the bed at the bottom that you're planting in. So in the same amount of space, essentially, you're growing a whole bunch more food. Or this whole arch thing, you can then put like, I don't know, like shade netting, insect netting or whatever. So it really doubles up its functionality, because then in the summer you have like these massive squashes and stuff growing over, and then in the winter you have this already in place infrastructure that you can very easily convert into a makeshift greenhouse to then grow other stuff in that same sort of space. And that brings me on to the next thing, succession planting. So again, like if you want to be self-sufficient, or you just want to grow a ton of food, then you really want to grow successively. Not successfully, but yes, successively. So succession planting is, you plant something here now, today, it grows, you harvest it, it's gone. Then in that same place, afterwards you plant something else. That's all it is. It's ensuring that a space that is cultivatable is always being cultivated. I think that's really the best way to say it. I don't know. It's just making sure that there's always something in the ground. Long story short. What you do want to try and do, right? Don't be like me and plant corn 3 months before the time. You want to ensure then, if you're growing, if you're doing like a lot of succession planting, make sure that you start things early enough to be able to then have like 2 or 3 crops of that same long variety in a season, or ensure that you plant something that has a very short maturity, right, and then something that has a very long maturity, intercrop it to then make use of the characteristics to either shade something out or whatever. And then again, as the quicker growing plants become consumed and harvested, then you can plant something else that's a very short growing crop. So again, another way that you can intercrop and plant successively. It's really a very powerful technique, and man, you can grow a ton of food. Like honestly, I'm gonna do a whole video on succession planting at a point. Dude, I grew a lot of food this season. It's awesome. So yeah, that's actually a whole bunch of techniques and considerations for how to plant out a space. Okay, so that's pretty much the video. There's a lot of different techniques on how to plant out a garden bed, a lot of different styles. Each way has its pros and cons, but because of that, everybody has a way that they could do it, which is really nice, because it really just helps with barriers to entry. You don't need a lot of space, you don't need a lot of money to get into gardening because of all these techniques available. So like me, I started with obviously 0 experience, but as well, you don't need a lot of experience to do all this stuff. You can literally just chuck a whole bunch of stuff in the ground, let them grow and whatever. But because there's so many different ways, there's a way for everyone, which is really nice. So yeah, I hope this was informative. If not, hopefully it was at least entertaining. So if you guys like hearing me ramble on about random gardening stuff, I encourage you to check out my playlist.